Hello followers and welcome back to my Minecraft tutorial series. This is episode 55 and in today's episode we're going to be taking a look at pulse circuits. So before we get started into today's tutorial, just a couple of things I want to go over. This is now where redstone gets a little bit more difficult. Everything that we've covered up to this point is fairly standard. It's not too hard to understand. From this point onwards it can get a little more tricky to understand, and while I know how to use this stuff to a degree, I don't profess to be any sort of redstone expert. It's very hard to explain what these things do without actually having some sort of proper demo. But for me to set up that, it would take simply forever, and we will end up using these things when we are back on the regular world. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to do it twice, if that makes sense. So I'm going to be giving you a basic overview to the different pulse circuits, what they do, and how they can be used. But, you know, I'm not the god of redstone or anything like that. I really don't. I understand it and how it works, and to a degree how to use it. But being able to explain it is a completely different ball game. It's very, very hard, and I'm not sure that too many people can do it, but because redstone is something that's not very well covered, I'm going to be going over it anyway. And if I seem a little dry today, my voice is a bit dry, that's because we're having a very warm day. It's 26 degrees outside, which is a lot warmer than it normally is in the UK, I can tell you that. We don't get this very often, so if I sound a bit dry, then I apologise. But this is going to be on pulse circuits. And what are pulse circuits? Well, they are circuits where you push a button or a lever or whatever it is, and it gives out a pulse, right? We already know that. A pulse circuit can control that pulse. So we can generate them, we can limit them, we can extend them, we can detect the length of them, and there are two other ones which are a little bit odd, known as the Monostable Circuit and the edge detector. So we're going to look at those as well, because they are to do with different pulses. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the pulse generator. And the pulse generator is generally not used on its own. It's used as part of what we're going to be looking at in a couple of episodes time, a T flip-flop. It's a key part to that. If you don't know what a T flip-flop is, don't worry, we're going to cover it. But basically it's like you use a button to toggle. It's basically a lever, but in button form, is basically what a T flip-flop is. And a pulse generator is very key to actually making one of those. So that's generally what it's used for. So a pulse generator creates a pulse output, so in this case the output is going to be a pulse when the input changes. So when we push a button or flick a lever or whatever, as I say, it's required to what's called clock flip-flops without a built-in edge trigger. But don't worry about that, that's very complicated stuff that we're not really going to delve too far into. All you need to know is it's an integral part of a T flip-flop, and it prevents the T flip-flop from changing in more than one operation. So you don't want it to push a button and it happen twice, you just want it to happen once. So that's what the T flip-flop is and does, and that's what they are used for. So let's take a look at these guys. So if we flick a lever, nothing's going to happen in this instance, but if I turn it off, did you see? Pulse went there. So this is generating a pulse when I turn off this. And how does it work? Well, first we power this block, so as we know the redstone turns on, which turns on this repeater, which shoves it into this block, turning this torch off, turning this off and this off. But when I turn it back on again, it actually turns this on first before this. So that gets turned off again for a brief second. So that's how you get the pulse there. And here's the opposite. It just activates when you turn it on instead of when you turn it off. So this one's basically an inverted version of this. So you can see the two there. Not too much of a difference really as far as that's concerned. It's just that there is a torch here instead of a piece of dust. So here's another vertical version if you needed it to be quite thin. As you can see, it's a very fast pulse. This one I'm using a button on. So as you can see, it turns that on, which turns this torch off, which allows this torch to come on. That's going to turn this dust off, allowing this torch on. but it's then going to turn it off again for a brief moment when the current has passed down here. So that's how you get a quick pulse there. And you can, I believe, change this repeater, say if we put it to 2, and it'll get a little faster. Or I don't think it will work at 1. Oh no, it does. If you put it at 1 tick, you can make a faster pulse. So you could choose the length of pulse depending on this repeater here. And you can do this, I believe, with these as well. If you play around with the repeaters, the World download will be available in the description. You can actually make the pulse longer or faster. We have this one right here as well. This is a double wide one, but it does allow for more flexibility with repeaters. This one is a slower pulse, so if you want to generate a pulse that's longer than your average stone button, then you can actually use one of these. And these here, again, we can actually have more repeaters kind of crammed into a flat area. If you wanted it to be quite horizontal, you can do that. And we have multiple options here. And this is just the inverted version of it. So that's what pulse generators do. They generate pulses of a specific length, and they're generally used in T flip-flops. So now we're going to move on to monostable circuits, and I'm sure many of you have heard of what a monostable circuit is, but if you don't know what it means, don't worry, we're going to cover it now. So a monostable circuit sends an output pulse of a determined length when triggered by an input pulse. So basically, no matter what input it is or how long it lasts for, the output is always going to be the same. So that's what makes these very useful. These are very useful in timing things, to be very exact, regardless of whether you're using a stone button or a wooden button or a lever. No matter what it is, it's always going to pulse the same amount of time. So unlike the pulse generator, where we can control it in and depending on the input that you use depends on the output pulse, this one just stays the same no matter what input you use. So here is a monostable circuit. There you go, fairly simple. So another way to describe this is a device which turns itself off a specific time after it's been activated. So that's another way of explaining it, if that makes it easier for you. They are either triggered by a rising or falling edge of a pulse, or it can be both. So what that means is a rising edge is when you, say if you have a lever, turn it on. So let's just grab a lever instead here. That'll be fine. Or falling is when you turn it off. And we're going to talk about that more when we get to edge detectors. So this one is a rising edge monostable circuit. It does not respond when the lever is turned off. So here is another quite compact version. Same here, that's a rising one. And we have another one here with a couple more repeaters. So all of these are rising, and that's generally the most commonly used ones, are the rising ones. So the term monostable just means that the only one state of the circuit is stable, the output. No matter what input it's going to be stable, it's always going to be the same. So that's it really. As regards that, there's not a whole lot more to say, and these are commonly used for when pulses lose duration as they pass through circuitry. Monostable circuits can be used for re-lengthening that duration, because as it goes through lots of circuitry, a button pulse, for example, could lose a bit of its momentum, so to speak, so you can re-strengthen them using a monostable circuit. So that's what they are for, because as we know, the output always lasts for the same amount of time regardless of an input duration. So if you've got a large circuit of lots of things going on and you've only got it linked up to one button, and you keep finding that your pulse is not always making it to a certain part of the circuit, consider implementing a monostable to just rebuff it a bit. So now let's talk about pulse limiters, and these are these things right here. And pulse limiters are very simple. They limit the length of the pulse, which means it gets shortened, basically. So these are commonly used to prevent multiple things from being activated by the same pulse. So if we have different things going on there and we don't want certain things to activate, we can actually use one of these. So as you can see, this one here responds when the button turns off again. So that means that this one is a falling pulse limiter. And you can see right here that we have this going on. And I believe if you swap this out, then it just inverts it. Yeah, it inverts it. So if you wanted the other way around, then you just have to take the torch away and put the dust in. And what this will do is it will shorten the length of the pulse. And if you play around with the repeaters here, it's going to lengthen it a little bit. So if you wanted a pulse that was, say, 3 ticks, then you would turn that to 3. And there you go. So that's a very compact version there. Here is a very sort of thin version, I guess you could say. That could easily be just done like that, I suppose. But here's another version which only uses 1 repeater if resources are a bit tight. And there's a very fast pulse. You can alter this. I don't believe this one works with 1. It only works with 3 or 4 pulses here. 3 or 4 ticks, should I say. So there's that. And here's a piston-based version. If you can see, this is I've got a sticky piston on the end of that, but you can see this is a very fast one if you needed something. And this relies on wire cutting here by pushing the block in. And that's what that is for. That's very handy, and something similar to this is actually used in my mob trap, but what we actually have is an edge detector, which we will get back to. So now that's basically that. That's what they're mainly used for, to shorten pulses, because that's what they do, and they just stop multiple things from activating if you just want one thing to be activated. Not a whole lot more to talk about as regards them. They don't do a whole lot more than that, really. So now let's talk about pulse sustainers or pulse extenders. And all these do is the complete opposite of pulse limiters. They extend the pulse. And they can make things longer. These are typically found when you want to keep something activated for a period of time. Maybe some sort of suffocation device. In your mob trap, for example, you probably would use a pulse extender. These typically get incorporated with other things such as RS and NOR latches, which we will talk about. When we talk about T flip-flops, we'll talk about latches at the same time, because these can form what's known as a reset for that. So here we have a pulse extender, very, very simple. It's just got a repeater here which goes to the piston. Then we have another repeater here which just kind of extends it a little bit and keeps it on for a bit longer than it would have had. Now, if you're going to play with the repeaters here, then you're going to need to make sure when doing this that this one doesn't pass through first. This one has to pass through first. I guess it doesn't matter actually, because it just means that this one will come in later, but all you need to do really is make sure, I don't think, well yeah, it'll even work if they're the same, won't it, because there's only one repeater on this side. But anyway, that's how it works. I'm trying to explain this and probably not doing a very good job of it, but well, I'm trying. And here is another version. This one has greater options for delay here. So this one relies on pistons. It has a block here, which when I push this button, lets the wire connect briefly, giving it a longer pulse, which then goes back to the output, which is right here, and another piston which pulls this block back into its original position, cutting the wire again. So that's how that one works. That's great for if you want longer delays. You could probably even add more repeaters right here, and you could get a good delay on that. And there are other ways of making it have a greater delay, but I'm going to try and keep it quite basic at this point, so we're not going to go too far into that. So after that, it's time to look at pulse length detectors, and these do exactly what it says on the tin. They detect a pulse length. So sometimes it can be useful to be able to detect the length of a pulse generated by something else going on, so another circuit, and specifically whether it's longer or shorter than a value that you want it to be. this has many uses, the most common of which is a combination lock, if you want to do that in multiplayer, and also for detecting Morse code, which I have never ever seen done. I don't know why anyone would want to do that, but it's there as a use of it. So if you want to play around with Morse code, if you even know what that is, then you can play around with that. I imagine most people will know what Morse code is. You learn it at school, I think. You don't actually learn Morse code, you learn what Morse code was. You don't actually learn it because it's no longer in use, but I could just imagine two people in Minecraft just Morse coding each other. And anyway, we're getting off topic now. Let's get back on topic, but yeah, that's a use of it. So you can test for a long pulse using an AND gate here with redstone repeaters attached. And this will only allow the signal to pass through it if it has a signal strength longer than the delay of the repeaters here. So I've got this set to 8. So if we try it around, that had a longer pulse than these two repeaters, and this is because the stone button lasts for 10 ticks, which is 1 second. These two repeaters are 8 ticks. So you could easily extend this just by adding more repeaters on. And obviously we have the old inverter there, the NOT gate, and then to the output. So the output is what you would basically use to test here to see how long a pulse is. So this is your given value. If you want to test to see if a pulse is longer or shorter than a given value, this right here is your value. You set this. And then you can test different inputs, and it looks a bit redundant with just this stone button here, but usually you would have a pulse coming into it from something else going on at the same time. So that would be a circuit back here, for example, and then you would be able to test that to see if it meets your requirements. And here's another version. This one is the same basically. Here we are, but this one actually shortens. The pulse that does get through will be shortened by the delay amount in this version. So here we have a delay amount of 4, I believe. So yeah, so it's going to get shortened down to around 6 ticks in this specific example. So this one is more complicated to use than that one, but this one will have its specific uses. This is like a subtraction thing, if you want to see. This will output if there is anything left, basically. If you did 10, take away 4, you would be left with 6, so it's going to output a pulse length of 6 ticks. So that is what pulse length detectors do. Very useful for testing various different things to make sure that they meet your requirements in Redstone. So finally we have the edge detector, and this one typically doesn't come up a whole lot in circuitry, certainly from what I've seen in survival, but we are going to cover it because we do have a edge detector in our world. We have the most common version of edge detector, and that is a circuit breaker. In my monster spawner trap for the zombie dungeon, the little lava thing that we have there is actually a circuit breaker, which is an edge detector. So I'm going to give you a basic introduction to what edge detectors are. These are probably the hardest things out of everything that we've looked at today to understand, and these don't come up too often. But edge detectors output a pulse when it detects a specific change in its input. So a rising edge detector outputs a pulse when its input turns on. A falling edge detector outputs a pulse when the input turns off, and a dual edge detector outputs a pulse when the input changes generally, so either on or off. An inverted edge detector, it would be the opposite of these, where the output is usually on instead. All you would do here is you would have redstone torches instead of dust in this specific example, and they basically do the opposite. So an inverted rising edge detector outputs an off pulse, so it turns it off when the input turns on. An inverted falling edge detector outputs an off pulse when the input turns off, and outputs a inverted dual edge detector outputs an off pulse when the input changes. So all it is basically the opposite in a sense. So let's take a look at these three. So this one is a falling edge detector. So when the input turns off, it lets out a very rapid pulse. So that's what that is. So if you want to know the difference, as I already explained, rising means when the input turns on, falling is when the input turns off. Dual is both. So that one there was a falling, so I imagine that this one is a rising. As you can see, the pulse went straight away. When I turn it off, this one also activates actually, so this one is a dual edge detector. This detects both instead of one. So this one will be the falling one. So it activates first, but then when I turn it off, nothing happens. So these are piston-based versions, which are basically act as circuit breakers. You push the block into this space here, cutting the wire, and we have a non-piston based version here. That one is when the input turns on, so that one is a rising edge detector, and this one here is a falling edge detector. So you can get away without pistons. I don't think there is a version for the dual without pistons. There might be. If there is, you will have to check the wiki for that, because I'm not entirely sure on that. But that's what they do. They don't come up a whole lot. They don't have many uses, but they can act as circuit breakers when you put something in, such as in our case, in our monster trap, when we input, we have a circuit breaker. It looks a little different to this. It's a slightly different version with a piston in the floor, which just breaks the circuit, and then lets out a very short pulse, which we have chosen using a repeater to give enough lava from the dispenser to bring the zombies down to, in our case, 2 hits. In my Let's Play series, it's 1 hit, because I did have the room to include that 4-block drop. So that is what the edge detectors do. So that's pretty much it, basically, as regards pulse circuits. That's a very basic guide to what these different things do. If you want to know more, there's going to be a wiki page link in the description to check out the pulse circuits page, where you'll be able to look at more in-depth stuff on this, and also you'll see probably some other designs besides what I had here. If you want to play around with the stuff here, there's going to be a world download link in the description as well, so you can play around with this stuff. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments and I will be more than happy to answer. And that's going to be just about it, guys. So a quick recap: we looked at pulse generators. They create a pulse. We looked at monostable circuits. They always have the same output pulse. We looked at pulse limiters, which shorten pulses. We looked at pulse extenders, which lengthen pulses. We looked at pulse length detectors that check how long a pulse is that you could set. And we looked at edge detectors, which are I don't know really how you would describe them. They output a pulse when they detect a change in their input. That is what we'll say for that one. So in the next episode, we're going to be taking a look at something a little bit more simple. We're going to be looking at clock circuits. This is a bit easier to understand than what we've done today, but this is a good chunk of knowledge to have here, even if it's only to a basic level. And then after that, we're going to be looking at, as I say, the T flip-flops and the RS NOR latches and stuff like that. And then after that, we've got a couple of other things to look at. But then we're going to be heading back to the main world to continue with a couple of other Redstone tutorials, and then on to the new 1.6 stuff, because Minecraft 1.6 is out, and I would like to get stuck into that stuff fairly soon. So that's been Pulse Circuits, guys. I hope that you've enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next episode. So until then, guys, see you later, and have a good day.